I'd like to start off by saying I agreed with 95% of what Daniel was saying, but I'm going to be filling in some of the blank spots, maybe glaring blank spots in his talk. And I think my main message is we don't understand the functions of the adaptations underlying depression, and that's what's hampering us, because we wouldn't have had a similar talk about what is, say, social anxiety, or what is arachnophobia. We wouldn't be afraid of reifying it. We wouldn't be afraid of the psychology of it. We wouldn't look at all of the different epiphenomena that might be associated with it. We just get down to business because we understand the function of fear. So, there are quite a number of functional explanations of why do we have the different anxiety disorders. None of them are probably very convincing. One of my favorite examples are theories of why we have social phobia that explain that if we didn't have it, we'd be socially ostracized. The fascinating thing is the self-ostracism of social phobics. They do it on their own. They don't need any help. They marry later. They don't have many friends. They don't excel in their jobs. They don't get promotions because they don't take any responsibilities. They stay at home and avoid social settings. So social ostracism is a result of social anxiety, and therefore not very convincing that that's a way of avoiding it. Fear of actual danger motivates us to avoid and defend. We've got species-specific defense responses, as described by Bollas, and we've got a whole range of behaviors that fear promotes that makes us able to fight, flight, freeze, and so on, described by Cannon. And I think a functional approach is exceptionally important to have when you're doing therapy, because we understand how to treat the specific anxiety disorders, and we delineate between and differentiate between the different disorders based upon what they specifically fear, what non-necessary maladaptive safety behaviors are activated, how misattribution to these safety behaviors maintain the disorder, and how discontinuing the safety behaviors and avoidance is helpful. This is the basis of when we treat efficiently from a cognitive, behavioral, or metacognitive perspective. A few examples. Panic disorder is a fear of, at least in Western countries, heart attack, choking, fainting, or going mad. It's mostly due to the misinterpretation of anxiety symptoms as a catastrophe consisting of these beliefs. It's maintained by safety behaviors that prevent the patient from discovering that the catastrophe is not imminent or that the safety behaviors don't help. And discontinuing safety behaviors and changing the perception of anxiety symptoms as non-lethal treats the panic efficiently. In average 5 sessions. GAD, generalized anxiety disorder. Excessive worry and the fear that worry itself is harmful and controllable is the focal point of the disorder. And just to be very clear about it, worry is about the future, but is genetically much the same as rumination, which is about the past. Worry itself in generalized anxiety disorder is the safety behavior and maintains the disorder. And in the general model of exposure and response prevention, what one has to do is remove the safety behavior. So discontinuing worry and changing metacognitions about worry treats GAD efficiently. Now, one of the problems of having a functional approach to the dysfunction is, as Nesse, as it's pronounced where the name originates, warns viewing diseases as adaptations is the most common and most and most serious mistake in evolutionary medicine. Diseases themselves do not have evolutionary explanations. They are not adaptations shaped by natural selection. The correct question is, why did natural selection shape traits that make us vulnerable to disease? Now, we do have, as mentioned previously, adaptive hypotheses about depression, such as the adaptive rumination hypothesis that suggests that adaptive function for depressive symptoms and rumination, where the more complex social problems elicit the more prolonged rumination. Anhedonia, sleep problems, reduced behaviors all exist to improve problem-solving time, and discontinuing rumination will actually make problems worse over time. Increasing rumination might improve depression over time, one suggests. A study we did for a little while ago considered how metacognitions and brooding, which is the depressogenic aspect, relates to depressive symptoms measured with the BDI. And as you see, the pathways are pretty strong. And although adolescent females have a higher level of all of these, the mechanisms are the same for both genders.
What's a metacognition?
Thinking about your rumination. So, do you believe that it's helpful? Or do you believe it's uncontrollable? Do you believe it's solving problems? Do you believe it's something you can't stop, has to happen? So you've got two types of metacognitions. Positive, my rumination helps me. It makes me better. It makes me solve problems. It makes me function better in the long run. And negative, it's uncontrollable. It's harmful. It's a sign that I have a brain disorder. So we try to actually, in therapy, remove the faulty belief that one has a brain disorder. If you can treat it in 10 sessions, the brain is probably not broken. It might be functioning differently at the current time. And that's an important difference. Excessive rumination might show up in different ways in brain imagery, but it doesn't mean it's broken. I mean, every single state we have in this room at this point, no matter what you're doing, paying attention to me or thinking about what you're having for dinner or problems in your relationship, all of them have mental imagery profiles, and not very specific ones. In this study, we tried to intervene by reducing rumination, 10 sessions with a rather high effect size, slightly higher than the ones that we were shown earlier today. We concluded that MCT is promising. So MCT is a treatment devised by Adrian Wells, metacognitive therapy. In this therapy, the patients hold all of the beliefs that are the tenets of the adaptive rumination hypothesis, and we, as therapists, work to change them. After a year, we had a follow-up and a small reduction in the effect sizes, but still we can conclude relatively stable treatment effect at 1 year follow-up. And then we did a 3-year follow-up with quality of life and return to studies or work. And we found that discontinuing rumination still had an effect. And this is where relapse is important to note. Most studies have a point relapse when they rerun the study, so it's only a post-follow-up measure. But people have multiple relapses in the period from when they were post to the follow-up. And an efficient treatment for depression has to reduce the number of relapses, make every episode shorter and less deep. So you want to fall into fewer holes, less time, no, more time between them, and not fall into as deep a hole for a treatment for depression to be good, because depression is in general a recurrent disorder. So many of our patients had not had new episodes, but many had, and it's important to note that in most studies, people just look at relapse when they have their follow-up. Many of the patients were no longer receiving social benefits. Several of them were working to a larger degree than they were, and also those who were studying were now back to studies. So in general, people were functioning better, and also the average quality of life was now in the normal range. As part of the team, for me, this was testing the adaptive rumination hypothesis, but the research was not motivated by that. But the conclusion is that reducing rumination results in good and lasting improvement across an unusually long follow-up period, but also improved quality of life and improved functioning. We've done the similar for worry and GAD, where we tested two different models, Borkovic-CBT and Wells metacognitive therapy, and where we found that discontinuing worry and reducing metacognitions provided better effect than challenging worry content and training relaxation. And in this study, we had a follow-up period of 9 years, which sounds impressive, but it was only because we were so slow at publishing the first paper. And here's a fascinating graph where I'm both a trait-oriented personality psychologist and a change-oriented therapist, and those two usually do not combine. But here we actually did the full NeoPi personality inventory, pre and post, and find that the treatment, both of the treatment modalities, caused a normalization of personality. So I think we have ample evidence that we can treat depression, also that it's not a brain disorder, and also, and that's those 5% of disagreement with Daniel, I think the cognitive aspects are relevant too. Regret is the same. I think I wrote 4 or 5 papers together with my mentor, David Buss, suggesting that regret is a beneficial thing. We all turn into better people if we regret a lot. People believe it's the most helpful negative emotion. They really love their regret. And it's, at the same time, surprisingly limited number of studies on actual adaptive effect. We found no measurable effect of regret on short-term sexual action or inaction regret. Inaction regret, I had the possibility of having a one-night stand, but I didn't. I regret it. Action regret, I did have one-night stand, and I regret it. People who regretted having done it did not change their behaviors in any adaptive way that we could measure. People who didn't do it, but wanted to have done it, did not do it in the next 4 months either, even if they had an opportunity. Now, obviously, if you know anything about male psychology, you'll probably guess that they were exaggerating their chances there, but that's a different problem. We mostly regret our bad habits. Lifestyle illness is real, and I guess if there are any Catholics in the room, repenting sinners do not, in general, become saints. And despite this, I'm pretty sure that most of the people in this room will continue to believe that regret is adaptive. So one of the claims I'm trying to promote is that sustained negative processing is probably not adaptive. And I recently have a chapter in press with a lot of help from Randy that is trying to make this claim as clearly as possible. And one of my fears is that we do run the risk of becoming pan-adaptationists or pan-selectionists if we don't check out just so stories by doing the research. And I do believe that a lot of the research we do not do is because we have blind spots. We have blind spots where we believe it is adaptive and therefore not necessary to test. So after making the claim that regret is adaptive 4 or 5 times, in good company, I felt we needed to check it, and the current findings suggest maybe not. Now, most of my colleagues do not like those findings, so maybe I'm wrong. One of the surprising things, though, is that while we know the function of fear very well, and we have done since before Cannon wrote about it, I guess, we've probably intuitively understood fear very well for a long while. We really don't know the effects or the functions of sadness very well. We have a lot of associated or epiphenomena or possible what shall one call it? Possible associated mental effects of sadness. But both sadness, grief, low mood, while as an evolutionist, I'm pretty sure that this is adaptive, we really don't know very well how it's adaptive and what it's doing. And this is just one of the examples. I could have said we have these metacognitions, or we have this ability to ruminate, or we have this ability to worry. Why do we do it if it's not adaptive? And I think it's important to note, excessive, it's pathological, and we shouldn't try to make an adaptive explanation. But in the non-excessive, in the human nature normal range of behavior, it probably is adaptive, but we haven't really done the basic research to find out how and when and in what way is it adaptive, how does it develop, when does it come online in a way that helps us. And there is almost no longitudinal studies of how these associated effects of sadness improve or not the situation of people experiencing it. In general, low neuroticism and high extroversion, I can recommend it. It's good for your life. The opposite, not that much. And in general, if it goes into the excessive area, it's pretty detrimental for both your somatic and your well-being. So one of the things that my research group are trying to get into now, I'm currently trying to work out how to study love, sickness, and heartbreak from the same paradigm that I've been doing my research on depression the last 10 years. But we want to get into the general function and specific functions of specific normal sadness and grief states. And although we know about many different possible perspectives to how it may be adaptive, there are so few studies that have considered this in a longitudinal way to suggest whether or not it actually does provide any benefits in the long run. So I think we need to heed the advice that we must consider the vulnerabilities and underlying structures that might be functioning. I've been speaking too much fast, I mean. Now, this is what I wanted to say, but I'm also a very obedient person when it comes to what I'm asked to say. And I was asked to give some input on how an evolutionary approach has made me a better therapist. Now, my Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde situation, where in Norway I'm either considered an anxiety therapist, I've been on prime television treating shrimp phobia. I don't know how many of you have that. It's a very unusual phobia. It's one of the least common phobia. Not many people go swimming and fear the shrimps. Not many people fear eating shrimps. But Prime Television wanted me to treat a Norwegian celebrity for his prawn phobia. And within 45 minutes, we got him to eat his first 6 prawns ever in a luxury restaurant in Oslo. Now, this is because we use very well-known principles of anxiety treatment based upon a very good functional understanding of both the safety behaviors, the fear mechanisms, how these different things regulate, including some of my own work on how play might be a better way of treating anxiety, especially in children, and where we've done some work on risky play and anxiety development. My other identity is a sex researcher from an evolutionary psychology perspective, so sexual and romantic psychology. How to get these two sides to meet has proven very difficult. From the clinical perspective, I'm a protocol therapist, and therefore I do what the manual says, and I am obedient, so I do what the manual says, and it works. Woohoo! People who don't follow the manual might not get the same results. But it does mean that sometimes I wonder if it's not so that my evolutionary thinking is improved by my clinical training. Because I think, especially in the field of psychopathology from an evolutionary perspective, we've had too much focus on the disorder being an adaptation. And I think my training inoculated me against that mistake. Sexual strategies theory, Buss and Schmidt's theory from '93, really has made me a better sex researcher. I'm pretty sure of that. We do find that we can explain both novel and different kinds of sexual and romantic behavior employing this theory. And we really do lack something similar. We lack a middle-level theory to predict psychopathology, functions, processes, and dysfunctions. However, as I say, you really need to be a functional-oriented psychologist when treating anxiety, because once you understand fear, that helps. I guess it's the same for sleep. I guess it would be the same for other disorders where we understand the basic mechanisms. But there are some important lessons. I think it was 27 when we were in London and Nessa was talking about social selection. And coming from an individual therapy tradition, that's an eye-opener. Just imagining how the social aspect of mental disorder is so vacant from almost every psychotherapy theory, and how the social domain influences every single patient you've had through life. I think it's one of those things that we just don't teach our students in psychology enough. I don't think we manage to integrate it into our clinical work. I think it's a big problem and something that we can't even excuse because we should know more about it. Then again, we exaggerate the single mother-child relationship and overemphasize the effects of these. I think I've already said that 3 times, so I don't think we need to go there again. I also think that one of the approaches to considering pathology is you have to understand how little we know about the normal functions. And when you don't know the normal function, it's very hard to be very clear-cut about what is and what is not pathology. The whole harmful dysfunction definition of pathology demands that we, as a science, both know the dysfunction and the function. So what we need is a lot more science considering how the normal underlying features of our psychology, how they work, what their role is, how they've evolved, how their development, and when they come online or not. And as I've said, one of them we don't understand fully is sadness. And also, we have to understand when sadness and low mood is adaptive and when depression is not adaptive. And we also have to understand that depressive symptoms are not depression and that low mood is not depression. In the literature, and today I think, we've been discussing both low mood, depressive symptoms, and depression as if they were the same thing. And I believe that that is one of the fundamental mistakes we keep doing in our science. We hope that, that something that's associated with low mood should be associated with depression, but it might not be. Because at some time we have to have functional low mood, sadness, grief, and there is probably some contexts, situations, social functioning where it is not functional anymore. I think we know it when it comes to anxiety. None of us would say that encountering a bear in the forest and having a fear response is maladaptive. We'd understand that it was functional. We understand that you want to have a fear reaction to it. But the problem, and I've actually done bear phobia training with people too. It's fun, from shrimp to bear. The problem when you have a bear phobia is that you're not afraid of real bears, you're afraid of imaginary bears. It's the same when you fear contamination by AIDS in general in your life. It's not real HIV you fear, it's imaginary. It does different things. Imaginary HIV can skip and leap into your pants from the bus seat. The bears you fear, they hide behind trees like the cartoon bears in, you've probably seen them. When they're hiding behind the tree, you can't see the bear at all, and they peek out, and then you see parts of the bear. These bears, they sit waiting for you outside your cabin in the forest. They stalk you, and they attack you. Real bears don't. They avoid people, especially in Scandinavia, where the bears that exist today are the descendants of those bears who weren't killed. Does that make sense? Yeah. So imagine you're a bear 10,000 years ago in Scandinavia. You approach the humans, often enough, you get killed. Today, the bears that exist, they avoid humans. It's a very sensible breeding program that's been functioning over a long time. So we have to understand that we know that fear is adaptive and sustained worry and imaginary fear is not. It seems that we can't, as an area of research, we seem to be struggling a lot more trying to differentiate between these two phenomena here. So, what's the future of evolutionary psychopathology? I've been working on these questions for about, well, almost 30 years, and some of us have been working on it even longer, and I think we've got sort of stuck. I think one of the problems is that we have not got middle-level theories that can aid us the way parental investment theory or parent-offspring conflict theory or sexual conflict theory or sexual strategies theory. there's a lot of middle-level theories in evolutionary psychology that really help us frame predictions that are testable, and we still haven't got that in this area. And despite that, we have too much theory to evidence ratio. Also, this very slippery thing, the promise of improved therapy methods having an evolutionary approach, it keeps evading us. And I think one of the major problems there is that, especially for depression, which catches our imagination more than anxiety, maybe because we already know that the treatments for anxiety, they range from 60 plus to 90 plus efficiency. So maybe that isn't considered an interesting area of research. But we have too many approaches that are trying to explain the adaptive function of the disorder. And I am very critical of the idea of increasing rumination for depressed patients. I think that is very problematic. I'm pretty sure that we need to understand the underlying mechanisms better, and I do believe that that's a more fruitful approach. So I think there are two things we need. We need more clinicians doing research, and we need more people considering the underlying mechanisms rather than the disorder itself. That's my conclusion.